My name's Sabrina Longley, and I'm a member of the executive team here at Down the Street Eats. I am so excited that you're going to be joining us for this accountability training today. It is extremely important to our organization, and we feel that accountability is a driving force in company excellence. Just to briefly run through the agenda with you, we're going to be talking about how accountability is typically thought of versus how we believe it should be thought of. We'll then go into implementation and examples of how to front load accountability, specificity, creating clarity, ownership, and making accountability public. Throughout this training, we're going to examine many different hypothetical scenarios and really figure out how accountability fits into our culture and into EOS, the entrepreneurial operating system that we run. Lastly, we have two final things to go over, and that will be training compared to coaching compared to reprimand, and the difference between each one and where we should be using each one. And then finally, we'll be going over the Swiss cheese model. And this will really help us pinpoint what holes happen when an incident occurs. All right, let's dive in. So, first things first, when you think of accountability, what do you associate with it? What kind of tone, what kind of words, what actions? Most people associate a negative connotation or a punitive connotation of being reprimanded, of being told something is your fault, that you must take responsibility, or being punished for an action. This is exactly opposite of how we want to look at accountability today. What is accountability? Accountability, by Webster's dictionary definition, is the quality or state of being accountable, an obligation or willingness to accept responsibility for one's actions. Note the adjectives here: quality, obligation, willingness, responsibility. Do these seem punitive like we previously talked about? Not really. Accountability means preventing something from going wrong. So let's approach this with a little bit of a more positive tone. Accountability is clear commitments which, in the eyes of others, have been kept. It's about being reliable, and it is about high performance, not fear and stress. Now let's dive into accountability application. First things first, accountability must be front loaded. Front-loading accountability means beginning with clear expectations from both the sender and the receiver. It is both parties' responsibility. I like to often say that if they knew better, they'd do better. Let's use an example for this. Let's say we have a front of house manager that's training a new employee, and they say to the new employee, "I expect you to do a good job sweeping and mopping the dining room each night." Well, this leaves some room for interpretation. What exactly does good job mean? I'm sure that we could come up with a bunch of different definitions for what good job means in this scenario. And this means that the manager's idea of a good job is most likely not the same as the employee's idea of a good job. So, how can this manager be more specific? They could say something along the lines of, "I expect you to do a thorough job sweeping and mopping the dining room each night by beginning with sweeping under each table and chair, ensuring that every crumb and straw wrapper is removed from the floor before you begin to mop." And then they could go into the details of how they expect the mopping to be done. By going into detail of what is expected, we are front loading the accountability. We don't want to have to go back and have another discussion or feel like we have to punish someone when something goes wrong. We really want to focus on building relationships, building efficiencies, and building success. We want to strengthen these relationships because the relationships are what get us through hard times. Punitive action and reprimands is what tears them down. This brings us to our next point: specificity. We briefly touched on this a little bit in the example with the manager, the employee, and sweeping and mopping the dining room, but let's dive into it a little bit more. Think about our leadership team and how we operate with our goals and our action items. We are always super specific with what we put into Asana, with what details we have for our rocks, with what details we have for our action items. We need to be the same way with each of our teams. We really need to remove words and phrases like as soon as possible, right away, or end of day. To really drive this home, let's use another example. Let's say it's a busy Friday night at the restaurant and we have a guest at a table who received the wrong cocktail. While the rest of their table's enjoying their cocktails, they're waiting for their server to come back. A manager notices that they look like they're complaining to the table or something may be wrong. So the manager goes over, has to guess what happened, and they explain that they did not order a martini. They definitely ordered a margarita and would like it right now. So the manager says, absolutely, no problem. That's what we're going to do for you. So the manager takes the incorrect cocktail, the martini, back to the bar, sees the bartender working, and says to them, hey, I need a margarita as soon as possible, or I need a margarita right away. Well, it's a Friday night. The bartender's busy. There's several people who just sat down at the bar. They have 3 or 4 tickets that they need to make. And so they're like, okay, as soon as possible. To me, that means as soon as I get through these 4 tickets. So the manager goes away to do something else, comes back expecting that margarita to be there about 2 minutes later, and it's not there. So the guest has continued to wait. What we could have done to prevent the guests from waiting even longer for their correct drink is the manager could have said something like, hey, we had an incorrect drink go out to this table. I need you stop what you're doing and make a margarita before you make any other drink. Clear. They are to make the margarita before any other drink. I will be back in 2 minutes to grab it. Perfect. 2 minutes. That's what I have to make the margarita. This is just one simple example to show how we can remove those simple phrases like as soon as possible or right away from our vocabulary, truly for the benefit of ourselves and the business. One thing I want to point out here in the specificity category is that we often associate deadlines with many different tasks that we do. We assign a deadline to every single action item and rock within Asana for our leadership team. A deadline is when the work is due. But what's really key here is a timeline. A timeline is when the work gets done. In a culture of accountability, it's when the work gets done that really counts. So think of how we write rocks in Asana. We create the rocks and we're really specific and we know that they're due by the end of the quarter or by the next traction session meeting. But we always ask every member of our team to go back through after that rock is created and create steps, create a timeline of what it looks like to accomplish that rock and what tasks you're going to have to complete to get that done. And that's your timeline. And that is how we ensure that those deadlines are met, right? So we have to make sure that we're doing this each and every day in our restaurants with even the simplest of tasks. When you model this, your employees will often take that same initiative and assign timelines and deadlines to many of the daily tasks that they do in the restaurant. The next piece of this puzzle is creating clarity. So right now, I'm going to jump right into another example for you. And we're going to talk about how to create clarity in this example. So let's say we have a manager in one of our locations and they're having a pre-meal or a huddle with their team and they're saying, let's make this the best Friday night shift yet. Well, what does the best Friday night shift mean? How can they be more specific? Think about that. There's 2 ways that they could approach this to be able to be more specific. The first way is to give their team some metrics, to be able to tell them, hey, let's make this the best Friday night shift yet by beating last Friday's sales and give them the number of last Friday's sales to beat. They could say, let's make this the best Friday night shift yet by having 0 incorrect meals come out from the kitchen this Friday. We don't want to have to send any food back to the kitchen tonight. We don't want any plates to go back. We want to ensure that everything comes out accurate and perfect on the first time tonight. They could also say something like, we are going to have a contest to see who can sell the most firecracker shrimp appetizers tonight. That could be part of their best Friday night. There's several different things that the manager could be doing here to really create specific measurables to really rally the team around this best Friday night. They could also flip it and ask the whole team and say something along the lines of, hey, what would make tonight the best Friday night for you? Would that be we beat last week's sales? Would that be that we didn't have any errors in the kitchen, or that nothing got sent back, or that we didn't have to comp anything? What does that really look like? They could get their team to set some of those measurables. The idea here is to create clarity by modeling situations, meaning we're taking responsibility, we're describing a desired outcome, and then we want to have the team reflect that they understand what we're shooting for and we understand what the goal is. We've all heard of SMART goals. We often talk about it when we create our rocks, but accountability calls us to be smarter. SMARTER stands for specific, measurable, attainable, same as the first few letters of SMART goals. The R here is results oriented. So this means that we're moving closer to the objective. The T is trackable. Then we go to ethical, meaning does it align with our core values? And then recorded. Is there someone to hold them accountable? Is there someone measuring the success? Is there someone who's going to, at the end of the night, say, hey, congratulations, Susie, you sold the most firecracker shrimp appetizers? Or is it a contest that started and no one follows through? No one has the accountability. And yes, choosing a winner from a contest is part of accountability. Traction stresses that clarifying accountability is what improves our efficiency. When we are extremely clear and we make sure that our accountability is smarter, then we in turn are actually truly improving our efficiency. The next thing we're going to jump to is now ownership. I want to make it really clear, and Traction stresses this as well, is that there are no teams in ownership. The buck stops with the owner of a project, even when something is delegated. So let's use an example for this. Let's say that we have a bar manager named Joe, and he's put in charge of a deep clean of the entire bar area. Fortunately for him, he has two helpers this evening. He has a bar back and also assistant bartender. So he's like, awesome, we're going to knock this out tonight. Now, Joe gets the list of the deep clean and he decides that he's going to break some of those tasks up and delegate them, which is great. He decides to give the ice machine cleaning to Susie. And let's say he gives the dishwasher deep clean to Bob, right? So they believe that they knock out this entire list, everything gets checked off. Susie and Bob go home, and the GM is going to check out Joe and just make sure that everything on the list was completed thoroughly. So they work through the list, they get to the ice maker, and they realize, hey, this was not done the way it should have been. This was not performed. This didn't have the deep clean perform that it should have. And so Joe, unfortunately, cannot say, well, you know what? I delegated that to Susie, so you can talk to Susie about it, because Joe was assigned this project. Joe has to take ownership for the entire thing, even the items that he may have delegated. We always say that you want to inspect what you expect, right? And that's what the GM's doing with Joe. Joe should have had a trickle down when he delegated these items and inspected and made sure that the things that he delegated were completed properly. And this would really help prevent the issue that we're having now. But again, at the end of the day, this piece is about ownership. And the point here is that even though Joe delegated, he has to accept ownership for this. Obviously, he can go back to Susie and talk about, the things that were missed. Maybe he did not front load the accountability or communicate clear expectations, but he's going to have to address those items. But at the end of the day, he does have to take ownership for this piece and it not being completed. The next thing that we want to think about with ownership is how we are assigning tasks. Often we assign tasks, I call it gopher style, because you have a go-to person who normally kills it. They do a great job at whatever you assign them to do. So they are your go-to, they're your gopher, they go get it done. Unfortunately, this is not how we want to be thinking of assigning tasks. Yes, we want to think of competency first. So think of their ability and who's going to knock this task out of the park. But second, we really need to think of bandwidth or capacity. We often have these people, these gophers, these rock stars that we just want to give the projects to because we know they'll kill it. But eventually, our gophers get tired. When they become overwhelmed with projects, they will bow out and they may seek another opportunity. And that's the last thing that we want to do when we have a rock star on our team. So tying in another piece of traction here, we really want to go back to that GWC, the get it, the want it, and the capacity to do it. And I know sometimes this is hard to think of when we have the, minute tasks of, hey, we're breaking up this closing checklist and let's see who's going to do what piece. But we really have to be intentional when we're thinking of projects of, hey, we need someone to do liquor inventory, we need someone to do a deep clean, we need someone to change out all the table tents, we need, there's many different projects that come up throughout the year, and it's easy to always assign the rock star, but we want to make sure that we look at our list, our roster of individuals, and sometimes it's okay, and it's okay to not pick the rock star who may not knock it out of the park, because we need to teach someone else. Someone else needs to learn to be a rock star, and the only way they're going to do there is if we train them, right? So when we have someone who already has something on their plate and they would be our go-to person, let's think of, okay, who's our number two? And do they have anything on their plate? Can we reassign this to them? The other thing is we talk a lot about the accountability chart, and ownership is a huge piece of the accountability chart. And we may not publish this in our restaurants or point to it on a daily basis as we should. But the idea here is that there are high level functions of each role, of each seat in our organization. And those high level functions are what the person is really good at. And in turn, that's what they own, right? So, for example, for myself in marketing, let's say that I forgot to send the monthly newsletter out. Well, it's not MailChimp's fault because I scheduled it wrong, or it's not the manager's fault because I didn't get the content I need. It's my fault because that is my ownership. And in my high function, one of my high functions in my marketing chair is email marketing. And I failed to do that piece, right? I like to say we always want to remember that when we're assigning ownership, that if everyone is responsible, then no one is responsible. So we never want to assign a project to a team. We want to make sure that there is one owner for that project, and then that owner can definitely delegate different aspects of that project to different members, but remember who the overall owner is and who the owner of each task is. That will really help front load that accountability for each piece. Now, we went over a lot of details of what accountability means and what aspects we need to include when we're trying to hold someone accountable. But I'm sure there's always the lingering question, or there's the devil's advocate of what happens when someone does fall short. Well, creating a culture of accountability is to be like Gandhi, consistently modeling the changes that need to be made to achieve your vision. So that means it starts with each of us on the executive team. It starts with each of us on the leadership team. One thing that is really important for leaders to understand is that they are highly visible to many people. I can think of many different scenarios where I've worked in restaurants and loved my leadership team. And I can think of some scenarios where maybe I had some complaints or wish things would have been a little bit different. And one common thing that I can think of in those situations where maybe I wish things were a little bit different is that the leader wasn't always visible. And what I mean by this is they're highly visible and you're noticing what behaviors they emulate, where they gravitate towards, what their leadership style is, but they're nowhere to be seen when things are really busy, right? I think we've probably many of us have had different scenarios where there's been times where it's a busy Friday night in the restaurant, everyone's busting their butt, the executive chef and the sous chef are sending out amazing food, and the front of the house, and they're back there leading their team, and the front of the house team is just, working on autopilot. But autopilot can only last for so long. And there may be a little issue that arises, or a question, or someone needs some help, and they're not sure where to get it. And they know that the manager is sitting back in the office catching up on paperwork. So you get employees going back and forth, trying to get the manager's attention, to get information, or to answer a question, or to get help. So keep in mind, even though in that instance they're not visible, their behavior is extremely visible, right? Their attitude towards the situation, them not being present on the floor at that peak time is visible. It's noted by the employees. So I'm sure in those situations, there have been employees that feel like, hey, I'm busting my butt and you're sitting back there, regardless if you're, working on getting a whole new menu out, or you have a big event coming up tomorrow and you got to, make sure that everything's ready, print the paperwork, trying to get the schedule done. Many different instances, right? They could be working really hard, but it's a visibility thing, right? So they're not visible, but their behavior is. This can create some inefficiencies in accountability because there's no one out there engaging with our employees and making sure that their questions are answered and helping them figure out difficult situations and maneuver one-off instances that occur on those busy days. So overall, what I'm trying to drive home with this point is that you are accountable for the influence you have on the organization's culture, no matter what position you hold on the organizational chart. And our team needs to understand that. One specific example I can think of for this is at Chick-fil-A. They think that they call their core four, and it's basically the four engagements of how we interact with guests, as well as our purpose. And believe it or not, their purpose is to create raving fans. Um, but their purpose and their core four, no one can move on and continue their training each day until they go over that. So when we bring on a new team member, every day we're asking them, okay, recite the core four and what's your purpose? Every day that they're training with us until the last day. And then finally, obviously they make it through training, they've gone through that every few days, but it's still it's still the leader's job to make sure that those are continued to be instilled upon them. So for example, for myself, when I was there and leading a team, there'd be times where I would get a bunch of $5 Starbucks gift cards, and we would do some Chick-fil-A trivia, and we would go over, I would start off with something easy, like give me the core four, tell me what your purpose is, encouraging people to participate and win those prizes, but really encouraging and influencing that culture and making sure that that stayed on the forefront. And so when you as a leader continue to push that and do that first, your influence is huge. And that ensures that the people, your team members, in their influence on the culture is also consistent with yours, right? That their influence on the culture is what we're yearning for, what we're asking for. The final thing I want to go over in this section is the mirror glass concept. Now, this is called the mirror glass concept because I'm sure many of you have seen different shows like Law and Order or investigation discovery shows where someone's brought into an interrogation room and there's a mirror in there, but it's actually a two-way mirror. So on their side, they see their reflection. It just looks like a normal mirror, but on the opposite side, people could be standing, watching the interrogation happen, observing their behaviors, mannerisms, that type of thing. The mirror glass concept in accountability means that when things go wrong, we need to look within ourselves and ask ourselves some questions. We need to look at the mirror and see ourselves and see what we could have done, or look through the glass and rewatch that situation play out and see how we could have influenced it better to create the result that we desired. So when things go wrong, we need to ask ourselves, where did I fail to communicate clear expectations? Who did I forget to include in the initial discussion? What could I have done differently or better that may have resulted in a more favorable outcome? So let's go back to our initial example with the sweeping and mopping of the floor. Instead of saying, oh my gosh, Susan, I thought I told you to do a good job. What is going on here? When you notice some issues, you need to reflect and say, well, what did I tell Susan to do? Told her to do a good job. Is that specific? Is that clear? Did I give ownership? Yeah, I gave ownership. I told Susan to do it, but I definitely was not clear. I was not specific. And I really didn't front load the accountability, right? So that falls on you. So this will really help lead us into the next section, which we're going to talk about training versus coaching versus reprimand. So a lot of people can kind of mix, mold, lump these three things together, lump these three terms together and get them confused a little bit. Typically, the most confused is the training and coaching, or coaching and reprimand, okay? So let's kind of work through these one by one. Let's start with training. Training, we're simply teaching someone something that they don't know. And what's really important to remember about training is it's often something that as managers or as leadership, we're thinking, oh my gosh, I got to take time out of my day. I got to block out certain time to make sure that this person gets trained properly. But the reason that we're doing that is because we go so much faster when we slow down and let them know how to do something properly. We slow down in order to go faster, right? So if we just kind of hurry through someone's training, just say, hey, do a good job sweeping and mopping, done. The next day, not only am I trying to fix the mistake that happened or the lack of work that had occurred from that instant, but now I'm going to have to go back, have a conversation with that employee, and have another conversation with that employee and teach them or train them properly how to sweep and mop. So I probably just spent double my time on one thing. Whereas if I would have just blocked out the time in the beginning to train them and show them how to do it, then things would have been moving faster already, right? The next thing is the coaching piece. And coaching is simply asking questions in the moment to help people become aware of what they already know. So oftentimes you hear in traction that someone needs to hear something 7 times before they hear it for the first time. So you want to think of coaching is the other 6 times you're telling people or encouraging someone to do something. Let's say that in the heart of the house, we have an issue where the truck was not put up properly and the boxes were not broken down at all. They were just thrown into the dumpster. Well, obviously that's an issue. And we may have talked about it one time. We may have trained them, hey, this is where the things go. Hey, we have to break down the boxes every time. This is their first instance that this has happened. So we're going to have a coaching conversation. And it should go somewhere along the lines of being pretty positive and upbeat. And let's say Joe's the employee that we're talking to today. So I say, hey, Joe, I noticed that we had a big truck came in this morning. Thank you so much for all of your efforts on trying to get that put away. There's a couple things that I want to go over with you so that we make sure that we knock it out of the park next time. Remember that ground beef goes on the very bottom of the refrigerator and that the lettuce goes on the very top shelf. Also, I noticed that only half of the boxes were broken down and the rest of the smaller boxes were just thrown in the dumpster. We need to go ahead and make sure we take those out and that we break every single box down so that we have enough room for everything in our dumpster. We never want to throw a cardboard box away that hasn't been broken down. Do you have any questions for me? Another thing that we can do when we're coaching is, like I said before, is ensuring that we're asking questions, right? So we noticed some of the boxes were broken down, but not the others, right? So we could ask Joe, hey, Joe, I noticed that you broke down all of the big boxes. Wonderful job. Was there a reason that we did not break down the smaller boxes today? And then whatever reason he gives, say, okay, well, thanks for explaining to me. I just want to make sure that you're aware that no matter what happens, we need to make sure that every single box, including the small ones, are broken down every time. So let's go ahead and backtrack and get those smaller boxes broken down. So really simple, just reinforcing. We often want to use coaching when it's a first time issue, or even if it's a continuing issue, but we see improvement. So for example, we have the instance with Joe putting up the truck order, and we noticed that, hey, he got another truck order this next week and he did a much better job than the previous week, but we still had an issue with something that was supposed to go in the fridge ended up in the freezer. All right, well, still a coaching conversation, because there's still been improvement, so we just want to make sure that we follow that same we just want to make sure that we follow through with coaching again on each item, right? Finally, here we have probably everyone's least favorite, and it's the reprimand. And this is a serious conversation when you are communicating a consistent issue. So it's been a consistent item. And the one that I would say we probably deal with most frequently is someone being late, right? And how do we address their lateness? A lot of times, and especially in our business right now, we need our individuals. And we may have individuals who are rock stars when they show up to work and when they're performing their job, but they are not on time. And it is so frustrating. So we want to make sure that the first time someone is late, we are having that initial coaching conversation with them. And that may look something like, hey, Susie, I noticed you were late today. Is everything okay? And they may say, oh my gosh, yes, I just overslept. I'm so sorry. Won't happen again. And you, as the manager, can just simply respond, okay, thank you for letting me know. I just want to make sure it's really important to our team to be respectful of everyone's time. And I really need to make sure that you're here on time in the future. The worst thing that we can do as managers is to not address and coach the initial time we see it. Because the first time we let it go away, then the second time, they're going to be like, well, why didn't you say something to me the first time? And the first time, like I said, can always come from a place of caring, concern, and coaching. And just ask a question. Just ask a question. And they'll probably put the guilt and blame on themselves 9 times out of 10 and realize, hey, they take, showing up on time seriously. But if we just let it slip like, oh, they're 5 minutes late. Okay. And then we realize, oh, they're 5 minutes late again this week. Now it's like, now we have to have our first conversation. Whereas when you address it the first time, they know to expect every time for you to address it, right? When you don't address it the first time, then it's like, well, they may address it, they may not. So next step after we've had that coaching conversation, if it becomes a repeated habit, and sometimes you may choose, depending on the employee, to have a coaching conversation twice at most. But by that third time, it's become a reprimand, okay? And so when it moves to this reprimand stage, we also want to make sure that this is still coming off an extremely caring, positive, and serious manner. So the best thing that you can do that Tim says all the time is refer to a core value. So when we have someone who's late, that this has been their second or third offense, we say, hey, Susie, I've noticed that this is the third time that you have been late. And we have a core value of consistency here. I know that every time you do come into work and that when you're on shift, you do a phenomenal job for us and you work really hard. So you're hitting the hard working, you have a positive attitude, and you're always looking to grow and improve things. Unfortunately, we're missing that consistency piece right now due to your tardiness. Is there anything I can do to help get you back on track? Let them answer, see what they have to say. And if they say, oh no, I just need to get up earlier, whatever their response is, say, whether it's they're asking for some help, see what you can do to help, but you want to close the conversation and saying, I appreciate everything that you do for us. I need you to be consistently on time. And unfortunately, if you're not able to be on time, then this next conversation will not look as positive as this one. Clear, concise, let them ask questions if they have questions. Life happens, so we do want to understand that these things happen. Let them explain to you, let them talk, and try and fix the situation. Sometimes I've had cases where I've had employees put on their availability that, oh, they can be here at 3:30, and then they don't realize that maybe they're a new mom or, whatever, different things happen. But I've had instances where they put on their availability, they're available at 3:30. So I schedule them the first week, they show up at 3:30, and then it starts a trend where they're 3:45, and they're consistently, a few minutes after 3:30, a few minutes after 3:30, and we have these conversations, and I say, hey, what's going on? Help me understand. And they say, I didn't realize how long daycare pickup would take or daycare drop off would take. And I've been pushing myself, but I cannot get here any sooner than 3:35, 3:40. Is there any way you could schedule me at 3:45? And I promise I will be on time every time from here on out. Okay, no problem. But you're adjusting that expectation. And then I've had employees who do that and they're on time every single time and there's never been an issue again. But you don't know unless you have these conversations. And if you're just like, oh, she had daycare drop off, she's going to be late. It's annoying to every other team member because the team members are like, well, the schedule says 3:30. I was here at 3:30, but she can waltz in at 3:37. It's annoying. Whereas they're like, oh, I'm scheduled at 3:30. She's scheduled at 3:45. She waltzes in at 3:37. Awesome. She's early. Great day. So you really have to understand also that as a leader, we have a lot of control over situations and we can manipulate them to our advantage and to really our employees' advantage as well. So just a little off spout on training, coaching, and reprimand. The final thing we're going to jump into today is the Swiss cheese model. And this is something that I shamelessly stole from my husband in his career in the military. They use this a lot, especially in aviation. So I am going to use an aviation example for this one. But as we talked about in the beginning, accountability reduces incidents. We said it's about high productivity and preventing something from going wrong. So the Swiss cheese model that you see on the left here, it's just a few different pieces of Swiss cheese. And at the far right side, it says hazards. And those are the holes, right? Those are the different things that could happen to poke holes in our cheese. And if all of the holes align perfectly on those few pieces of cheese or those few categories, then that's when an incident can occur. So I'm going to use an aviation example first because I think it's really easy and clear to see kind of what's going on here. And then I'll give you a made up hypothetical restaurant scenario as well. So you have two different examples to go off of. So the first is the Tenerife airport crash in 1977. So what's going on here is we had two airplanes, the KLM and Pan Am flights had collided on the runway. There were 583 fatalities, and this is one of the deadliest aviation crashes in history. And there were many different factors or many different holes that aligned perfectly to create this incident. So let's go through them a little bit. So there was a terrorist incident in Gran Canaria Airport that caused many flights to be diverted to this Tenerife airport. So the airport, because all these flights were diverted, it became very congested and airplanes were completely lined up on the taxiway. So it was completely blocked for taxiing. And when an airplane taxis, it means they're going to or from their gate. So they're either going to the runway to begin their takeoff or from the runway and they're going to their gate to let their passengers deplane. So in the KLM flight, we have a captain in there who created what we call a very toxic cockpit environment. And that's because the captain was very sure of himself, very aggressive, did not like to listen to any other authority, was just very confident in his ways. And his first mate, he kind of belittled and put down and really didn't take into account anything that he had said. So this captain heard over the radio and thought he was cleared for takeoff. And when they listen to the black box recordings, they hear, he goes, okay, we're cleared for takeoff. And the first officer goes, no, we're not. And he goes, no, I know what I heard. Something along the lines of, no, I know what I heard. I'm the captain. We're taking off. And instead of the first officer feeling enabled or feeling like they could speak up and just jam on the brakes and really force this guy not to take off, he was like, all right, you must be right because you're so aggressive about it. And the guy went to take off. And that's when the crash happened, because the Pan Am flight had just landed and was taxiing off the runway to get to their gate. And it was foggy. They couldn't see. So he went to take off and just flew right into that plane. So what holes aligned here? There's many different things I went over. What were the major holes in this story? First thing we had is the outside factors, that there was a terrorist event that caused all these planes to be diverted to this airport. So the airport is now congested. There's fog that I mentioned at the end. The fog is everywhere, can't see clearly. There's no clear visibility on the runway. The taxiway is now blocked, so the only way to taxi is actually through the runway, which is a hazard to begin with. And then lastly, which is one of the biggest factors here, is we have a super toxic cockpit environment and an employee who feels that they cannot step up and correct their boss when they see an issue or when they see something that's gone wrong, right? And this caused a huge fatality. So all those holes, and there were several different factors, but all of those things had to align for that incident to occur. So let's jump into a restaurant specific scenario. And it is one that we have all dealt with. And that is getting a negative review on Google or Yelp. So let's say that we had a review. Karen left us a review on Google and she just trashed us and said that she waited for over an hour for her food. Her burger was overcooked. And then the whole table, because they were a group of party of 10 or more, had an automatic 18% gratuity. And that wasn't mentioned to them by their server at all. And they were just surprised with it with the bill. She's just not happy. She just completely trashed us. So as the manager, it is now our job to take that review. And sure, we have the things that she listed out that, are incidents that are the effects, but we have to find the causes to those effects, right? We need to go back, look at our Swiss cheese model and find the holes and figure out what happened. So we go back, we look, well, last Friday, it was 4th of July weekend, and we don't control that. That's an outside influence, the calendar controls that. So that's the first thing we know. It's one of our busiest days of the year, 4th of July weekend. Okay. Next, let's figure out. Karen came in at approximately 7 o'clock. That is when the entire restaurant was packed and we were on over an hour wait. So looking back at our reservations and how we sat people, it looks like Karen was the last table to be sat by the host before we went to that wait. So that means the host had sat the entire restaurant. Well, the host, we find out, neglected to say to Karen when she sat her that, hey, just to let you know, I just sat the entire restaurant, so it is probably going to be a little bit for food, probably about an hour or so. Are you okay with that? We'd love to still serve you, get you some cocktails while you wait. I just want to make sure you know that the food's going to take a little bit longer this evening. Could have said that, but the host didn't. And then the server came over because server has so many tables, they're frazzled. They come over and they say, hi, my name's Susie. I'll be taking care of you tonight. What can I get you started with to drink? And that's it. No, hey, how are you? Welcome in. Happy 4th of July weekend. I just want to let you know that our kitchen is really backed up now. So it's probably going to be about an hour wait for food. We would still absolutely love to take care of you and serve you and get you some great food. But I just want to make sure that that's okay for you, that an hour wait is going to be okay on the food. I'm happy to get drinks started, get you some bread out, and explain that to them. The server didn't do that either. And then we have the kitchen, right? And the kitchen is so backed up, and they're on the line and they're making a whole, I mean, the cheeseburger is the number one seller, we know. So they're making just tons of burgers and they got them all going. Well, Karen had ordered hers medium rare, and they had one side was like, oh, we're cooking medium rare on this side and medium well on this side. And then someone was like, oh, I really got to use the bathroom. And so someone jumps in and it's like, okay, no problem. I got the burgers, and just starts dishing out burgers, and boop, Karen gets a medium well. So we could have instead said, hey, I have to use the restroom. I just want to let you know before I leave the station. Over here, we got medium well. Over here, we got medium rare. Do you have any questions? Okay, great. I'll be right back. Go to the room. So another hole in our Swiss cheese. And then we have the leadership, right? So all this has been going on, all these negative things have occurred, right? And then we have the server never mentioned the 18% gratuity. The guests are grumbling a little bit, but the manager's trying to help expo food and run drinks, and they could tell maybe there's something wrong, but they don't take the initiative to go over to the table. Or the server notices, they're like, why is there an 18% gratuity? And they're like, well, you're a party of 10 or more. Like, that's our policy. And she's like, well, it's not stated on your menu. You didn't let me know. She's like, okay, well, I'm sorry. And leaves. Instead, it would have been the perfect opportunity to be like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry about that. Let me get my manager for you, and get the manager and address the situation. And then the manager could say, hey, I'm so sorry about this. Let me fix this for you. By the way, like, how was your service tonight? Is there a reason, that we fell short, or what could we have done better? And you may have been able to stop that review at the door and stop that incident, right? Because we didn't let the Swiss cheese align perfectly. So that is really what, long story long there. The Swiss cheese model is a big key, that when we have incidents, going back and figuring out what aligned perfectly to allow these incidents to happen. And for myself as a human resources director, this is a big part of my job. When we have human resource complaints or incidents, it's, investigating and figuring out what holes align to create this incident. That is one of the last pieces that I have for you in this training today. Just to do a brief recap, I know we went over so much and tons of good nuggets of information, but I just want to, kind of drill home these last few points, that holding ourselves and our teams accountable is key to high performance and preventing mishaps, right? So we really want to make sure that we create accountability that is positive, that is front loaded, that is specific, that is clearly communicated, and that is owned by someone, that is specifically owned by someone. And that when someone does fall short, we address it in the right setting. We either take the opportunity to train, we take the opportunity to coach, or we take the opportunity to reprimand. We take each training moment and reprimand as they come, even when it's at the most inopportune time, because we remember that when we go slower, we will end up going faster, guys. And remember, a lot of times when we're addressing accountability and we think, oh my gosh, like, this didn't get done, that didn't get done, I want to encourage you to think about yourself and think that if that employee knew better, then they do better. So what can you do to ensure that they know better? Thank you so much for joining me on this training today. It has been truly my pleasure to guide you through this. And as always, if you ever need anything, have questions, comments, or concerns, I'm always available to help you in any way possible. Thank you, and I hope you have an amazing rest of your day.